The Afghanistan sun hammered down on forward operating base Chapman like a molten anvil, casting razor-sharp shadows across the hardpan where Staff Sergeant Marcus, Bulldog, Rodriguez adjusted his headset for the third time in 10 minutes. The static crackled through the comm system, punctuated by the distant thump of rotors and the perpetual hum of generators. But something was wrong with the morning briefing. Colonel Hayes had that look, the one that meant someone was about to get orders they didn't want. "Listen up, people," Hayes barked, his weathered face grim beneath the fluorescent lights of the Tactical Operations Center. "We've got a SEAL team compromised approximately 40 clicks northeast of here. Taliban forces have them pinned in a valley with no viable extraction route. Air support is tied up with operations in Helmand Province." He paused, letting the weight settle. "Command says there's nothing available for immediate close air support." The room fell silent except for the endless electronic chatter of radios and the soft whir of cooling fans. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. SEALs didn't call for help unless they were in deep trouble. The kind of trouble that usually required fast movers, dropping ordnance danger close to friendly positions. The kind of trouble that killed good men when the cavalry didn't show up. "Sir," came a voice from the back of the room, crisp and controlled. "What about the A-10 that landed for refuel 20 minutes ago?" Hayes turned, his expression shifting to something between irritation and resignation. "Captain Nakamura, that bird is scheduled for maintenance stand-down. Besides, it's a single-ship operation with no wingman support." Captain Akira Blade Nakamura stepped forward, her flight suit bearing the worn patches of multiple deployments. At 5'4", she looked almost diminutive among the broader shoulders and taller frames surrounding her, but Rodriguez had seen her work. The woman could make an A-10 Thunderbolt dance like a sparrow and hit targets with surgical precision that would make a sniper weep with envy. "Sir, maintenance can wait. Those SEALs can't." Her dark eyes held steady on the colonel's face. "I can have that hog spun up and airborne in 15 minutes." Hayes shook his head slowly. "Negative, Captain. Command directive is clear. No single-ship CAS missions without proper backup. Too much risk for one pilot." But Rodriguez caught something in Nakamura's expression, a flicker that spoke of decisions already made and protocols about to be challenged. He'd flown with enough pilots to recognize that look. It was the same expression he'd seen on the faces of aviators who just decided that sometimes the right thing to do and the orders you received weren't the same thing. The radio crackled again, this time carrying the desperate voice of a SEAL team leader requesting immediate air support. The clock was ticking, and everyone in that room knew it. 26 minutes later, the unauthorized thunder of a single A-10 Thunderbolt II shattered the morning calm as it lifted off from Chapman's runway, banking hard toward the northeast. Colonel Hayes stood at the operations center window, watching the distinctive silhouette disappear into the heat shimmer, knowing full well he should be court-martialing his finest close air support pilot instead of praying she'd come back alive. Captain Akira Nakamura had earned her call sign Blade, not for any dramatic combat maneuver, but for her surgical precision in delivering ordnance exactly where it needed to go. The other pilots had initially meant it as mockery. The quiet Japanese-American woman who'd grown up in her grandmother's shadow, learning patience and precision from hours spent in meditation and traditional sword forms. They'd snickered when she'd mentioned her martial arts background during her first squadron assignment, thinking it was cute that the small woman believed ancient disciplines had any place in modern warfare. The snickering had stopped after her third deployment, when she'd saved a Marine convoy by threading 30 cannon fire between friendly and enemy positions with margins measured in meters, not hundreds of meters. Blade wasn't just a call sign anymore. It was a statement about the kind of pilot who could cut through chaos with deadly accuracy. Now, climbing through 8,000 feet in her beloved A-10, she felt the familiar calm settling over her as the aircraft responded to her touch. The Thunderbolt II wasn't graceful like an F-16 or imposing like an F-15. It was a flying tank, built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon that could chew through armor like tissue paper. Ugly, slow, and absolutely perfect for the mission ahead. Dragon Base, this is Blade 11, requesting immediate tactical frequency for SEAL Team in Sector 77 Alpha. Her voice carried the professional calm that had become her trademark, even as she violated direct orders and potentially ended her career. The radio remained silent for several seconds before a different voice crackled through her headset. Blade 11, Dragon Base. Be advised, you are not authorized for this mission profile. Return to base immediately. Akira's fingers tightened slightly on the stick, but her voice remained steady. Dragon Base, Blade 11 copies your transmission, switching to tactical frequency. She reached over and dialed in the SEAL Team's frequency, effectively cutting off further argument from her chain of command. Viper 6, this is Blade 11. I understand you're having a party and need some noise complaints filed with the neighbors. The relief in the SEAL Team leader's voice was palpable. Blade 11, Viper 6. Thought Command said no air cover was available. We are definitely having party crashers. Multiple technical vehicles and approximately 50 personnel with crew-served weapons. They've got us boxed in a valley with limited cover. Akira banked the A-10 toward the coordinates, scanning the terrain below through her targeting pod. The valley stretched between two ridgelines like a wound in the earth, with the SEAL Team pinned near its head while enemy forces held the high ground. It was a textbook kill box, if you were the ones doing the killing. Viper 6, Blade 11 has your position. I see your smoke. Danger close is going to be very danger close today. How copy? Blade 11, we copy danger close. These guys aren't giving us much choice in the matter. We trust your reputation. The weight of those words settled on her shoulders like her grandfather's katana, sharp, precise, and demanding nothing less than perfect execution. Below, she could see muzzle flashes winking from enemy positions, each one representing bullets aimed at American servicemen who'd expected to die alone in that valley. Through her targeting system, Captain Nakamura identified the first target, a technical vehicle with a heavy machine gun mounted in its bed, firing down into the valley where the SEALs had taken whatever cover they could find. The Toyota pickup looked tiny through her scope, but she'd learned long ago that size didn't matter when you were the one being shot at. Every enemy fighter eliminated was one less rifle pointed at her countrymen. She rolled the A-10 into a shallow dive, lining up her attack run with the methodical precision her grandmother had taught her in the art of Iaido, the Japanese sword-drawing technique that emphasized perfect timing and flawless execution. One cut, one kill. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Viper 6, Blade 11 is inbound from the southwest. Keep your heads down for the next 30 seconds. The A-10's cannon spun up with its distinctive whine, and Akira felt the familiar vibration through the aircraft's frame as 277 rounds of 30-depleted uranium ammunition streaked toward the target at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The technical vehicle simply ceased to exist, replaced by twisted metal and a crater that would serve as a warning to the other enemy fighters. But warnings, she knew, only worked on people smart enough to heed them. Good hits, Blade 11. You just made some very bad people have a very bad day. We've got movement on the eastern ridgeline. Looks like they're trying to flank our position. Akira pulled up and banked hard left, her G-suit squeezing as she maneuvered for another attack run. Through her canopy, she could see more muzzle flashes from the eastern ridge, and her threat warning system chirped softly as someone down there tried to paint her with a targeting laser. The A-10 had been built to absorb punishment, with redundant flight controls and armor plating around the cockpit, but that didn't mean she intended to give the enemy any easy shots. Viper 6, I see the movement. Looks like they brought friends to the party. You might want to find better cover while I explain the rules of engagement to our uninvited guests. She could hear gunfire in the background of the SEAL team leader's transmission, sharp cracks of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of enemy AK-47s. These men were fighting for their lives with whatever ammunition they had left, trusting that a pilot they'd never met would somehow tip the balance in their favor. The responsibility felt familiar, like the weight of her ancestors' expectations that had followed her from childhood through the Air Force Academy and into the cockpit of the world's most effective close air support aircraft. Honor was not something you talked about. It was something you lived, one decision at a time. The eastern ridgeline erupted in dust and flame as her second strafing run found its mark, scattering enemy fighters who thought themselves safely positioned to outflank the trapped Americans. But Akira knew this was just the beginning. The radio chatter indicated more enemy forces moving toward the valley, and her fuel gauge reminded her that even the most determined pilot couldn't stay airborne forever. Blade 11, Viper 6. That was beautiful work, but we've got more company coming from the north. Looks like a whole convoy of vehicles headed this way. How much gas you carrying? Akira glanced at her fuel readouts and did the mental calculations that every combat pilot learned by heart. Enough for maybe 20 more minutes of combat operations, assuming she didn't have to make too many high-G maneuvers or afterburner climbs. Not nearly enough to deal with an entire convoy plus whatever other enemy forces might be converging on the valley. Viper 6, I've got enough fuel to make this interesting for a while longer, but I'm going to need you folks to be ready to move when I create an opening. This is about to get complicated. She keyed her radio to the base frequency, knowing she was about to make her situation significantly worse from a career standpoint. Dragon Base, Blade 11. I need immediate coordination for emergency resupply or additional air assets to my location. We have American forces in contact, and I am the only air support available. The response came back sharp and angry. Blade 11, you are ordered to return to base immediately. You are in violation of direct orders and creating an international incident by operating without proper authorization. Akira looked down at the valley where muzzle flashes continued to wink like deadly fireflies, where American servicemen were burning through their ammunition in a desperate fight for survival. The choice between following orders and doing what was right had never been clearer. Dragon Base, Blade 11. Unable to comply. I have Americans in contact and am the only available air support. Will RTB when mission is complete. She switched back to the SEAL team frequency, cutting off whatever angry response was coming from her command post. Sometimes being a good officer meant being willing to accept the consequences of doing the right thing, even when those consequences included the end of your career. The convoy appeared on the northern horizon like a line of ants, dust clouds marking their rapid approach toward the valley where the SEAL team was fighting for survival. Through her targeting pod, Akira could count at least 8 vehicles, a mix of pickup trucks and what looked like an old Soviet-era armored personnel carrier bringing up the rear. Each vehicle bristled with weapons and carried fighters eager to claim credit for killing American Special Operations Forces. Viper 6, I count 8 vehicles in that convoy, including what looks like armored support. I'm going to try to break up their party before they reach your position, but you need to be ready to move the moment I give you the word. The SEAL team leader's voice carried the strain of prolonged combat, but his professionalism remained intact. Copy that, Blade 11. We'll be ready. And ma'am, whatever they're paying you, it's not enough. Akira smiled grimly as she rolled into her attack dive, responding to her controls with the solid reliability that had made it the most beloved aircraft among ground forces worldwide. The Thunderbolt II had been designed in the 1970s specifically for this mission, keeping American troops alive by destroying whatever was trying to kill them. Every rivet, every system, every design choice had been made with one goal in mind: bring the boys home. The lead vehicle in the convoy grew larger in her targeting reticle as she approached from the southwest, using the sun's angle to mask her approach until the last possible moment. The fighters in the back of the pickup truck were scanning the sky, but they were looking in the wrong direction. By the time they spotted the distinctive twin-engine silhouette of the A-10, it would be far too late to matter. Her cannon spoke again, and the lead vehicle vanished in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. The convoy immediately scattered, vehicles peeling off in different directions as their drivers realized they were under attack from above. But scatter tactics only worked if you had somewhere to hide, and the open terrain around the valley offered precious little concealment from a pilot who knew her business. The second vehicle died before it could complete its evasive turn, victim of the same surgical precision that had earned Captain Nakamura her reputation throughout the theater of operations. The surviving vehicles were firing back now, streams of tracers reaching up toward her aircraft like deadly fireworks, but the A-10 had been built to absorb small arms fire. It would take something much more substantial to bring down the flying tank. Through her headset, she could hear the change in the SEAL team's radio chatter. The relief was obvious as enemy fire slackened, and their tactical situation began to improve. These men had faced the very real possibility of dying in an anonymous valley in Afghanistan, and suddenly they had hope again. But hope, Akira knew, was a luxury that had to be earned through precise application of violence against those who threatened American lives. The armored personnel carrier had taken cover behind a rocky outcropping, but its commander had made the mistake of thinking Soviet-era armor could protect him from 30 depleted uranium rounds traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Akira approached from an angle that gave her a clean shot at the vehicle's more lightly armored rear section, where the engine and fuel tanks offered particularly attractive targets. Her third strafing run left the APC burning like a torch, black smoke rising into the clear Afghan sky like a funeral pyre for enemy ambitions. The remaining pickup trucks were fleeing north, their crews apparently having decided that martyrdom was considerably less appealing when faced with the reality of an A-10 pilot who clearly knew her business. Viper 6, Blade 11. I count 5 vehicles destroyed, 3 fleeing north. Your immediate area should be clear for extraction, but I recommend moving quickly before they decide to come back with friends. The SEAL team leader's response carried a note of amazement that professional warriors rarely allowed to creep into their communications. Blade 11, that was absolutely surgical. We are moving to extract LZ now. Request you remain on station until pickup arrives. Akira checked her fuel gauges and felt her heart sink slightly. She had perhaps 10 more minutes of combat operations remaining before she'd be forced to return to base, leaving the SEALs vulnerable if enemy reinforcements arrived. The mathematics of fuel consumption were unforgiving, even for pilots willing to push every envelope. Viper 6, I can give you 10 more minutes on station, then I'll need to RTB for fuel. ETA on your pickup. A different voice came through her headset, this one belonging to a helicopter pilot approaching from the south. Blade 11, this is Dustoff 73. We are inbound to your location, ETA 8 minutes. Thanks for clearing the neighborhood. Relief flooded through her as she spotted the distinctive silhouette of a Black Hawk helicopter approaching at low level, staying beneath the ridgelines to avoid enemy observation. The cavalry was finally arriving, which meant her unauthorized mission might actually have a happy ending despite the career implications she'd face upon returning to base. The Black Hawk helicopter settled into the valley like a giant mechanical insect, its rotors stirring up clouds of dust that obscured the SEAL team's movement toward the extraction point. Through her targeting pod, Akira maintained overwatch, scanning the surrounding terrain for any signs of enemy forces attempting to interfere with the pickup. The Taliban fighters who'd fled north were still visible as tiny figures in the distance, apparently having decided that discretion was indeed the better part of valor when faced with American air power. Dustoff 73, Blade 11. Your LZ appears secure. I'm not seeing any immediate threats but recommend expedited pickup procedures." The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through her headset with professional acknowledgement. "Copy that, Blade 11. We'll make this quick and dirty. SEAL team is loading now." Through her optics, she watched the 8-man SEAL team sprint toward the waiting Black Hawk, their movement disciplined despite their exhaustion. These men had been fighting for their lives in a valley that should have become their tomb, and only the unauthorized intervention of a single A-10 pilot had prevented their names from being added to the memorial wall at Dam Neck. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Every military pilot understood that their primary mission was bringing their fellow Americans home alive, but understanding it intellectually and living it in practice were entirely different experiences. She had just prevented 8 families from receiving folded flags and expressions of regret from their government. "Blade 11, Viper 6, came the SEAL team leader's voice as his men completed their boarding procedures. "We are secure and ready for extract. Ma'am, I don't know what they're going to do to you when you get back to base, but you saved 8 American lives today. That's something you can take to the bank." Akira felt moisture gathering in her eyes, though whether from emotion or the dry Afghan air she couldn't say. "Viper 6, just doing my job. Get your boys home safe." The Black Hawk lifted off with its precious cargo, banking south toward the relative safety of friendly territory. Akira maintained her orbit until the helicopter disappeared beyond the southern ridgeline, then turned her own aircraft toward Chapman and whatever consequences awaited her there. Her fuel gauges showed critical levels, but she'd managed to complete the mission without having to declare an emergency. As she flew south, her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Blade 11, this is Dragon Actual." Colonel Hayes' voice carried a tone she couldn't quite interpret. "RTB immediately for debrief. And Captain, well done." The simple phrase carried more weight than any formal commendation could have conveyed. Her commanding officer, the man who should have been preparing her court-martial paperwork, had just acknowledged that sometimes following orders and doing the right thing were mutually exclusive concepts. It didn't mean her career was safe, but it suggested that perhaps her actions would be viewed in the context of their results rather than their technical violations. Forward Operating Base Chapman appeared ahead like a collection of tan buildings shimmering in the heat, the runway stretching out to welcome her home after a mission that had lasted less than 2 hours but felt like a lifetime. As she approached the pattern, Akira could see vehicles gathered near the flight line, more than would normally be present for a routine landing. Word of her unauthorized mission had apparently spread throughout the base. She brought the A-10 down with the gentle precision that characterized all her flying, the aircraft settling onto the runway with barely a chirp from the tires. As she taxied toward the ramp, she could see the faces of ground crew members and fellow pilots gathered to watch her arrival. Some looked worried, others impressed, but all recognized they were witnessing something that would become part of squadron lore. The engines spooled down with their characteristic whine, and suddenly the cockpit felt very quiet. Through her canopy, she could see Colonel Hayes approaching with several other officers, their expressions unreadable in the harsh Afghan sunlight. Whatever came next, she had no regrets about her choice to place American lives above career considerations. Captain Nakamura completed her shutdown checklist with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of her flying, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the canopy release. The weight of what she'd done, both the mission success and the career implications, was finally settling upon her as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. The canopy hissed open, bringing with it the familiar smells of jet fuel, dust, and the peculiar mix of machinery and human effort that characterized every military base she'd ever known. But there was something different in the air today, a quality she couldn't quite identify until she began climbing down from her aircraft and heard it clearly for the first time. Applause, slow at first, then building as more personnel joined in, until the flight line echoed with the sound of gloved hands clapping together in appreciation for what they'd just witnessed. Maintainers, pilots, ground crew, security forces, representatives from every unit on the base had somehow materialized to witness her return from a mission that officially had never been authorized. Colonel Hayes reached her first, his weathered face showing a mixture of exasperation and pride that probably reflected his internal struggle between military discipline and human decency. "Captain Nakamura, you and I need to have a very serious conversation about following orders and the chain of command." "Yes, sir, I understand completely." Her voice remained steady despite the tremor in her legs as post-flight fatigue began to set in. "But first," Hayes continued, his voice rising slightly so the gathered crowd could hear, "I need to tell you that 30 minutes ago I received a call from General Morrison at Bagram. It seems word of your little unauthorized adventure reached some very high levels very quickly." Akira felt her stomach drop. General Morrison commanded all air operations in Afghanistan, and his attention was rarely a good thing for junior officers who had violated direct orders. "Sir, I take full responsibility for my actions. I knew I was disobeying orders when I—" Hayes held up a hand to stop her. "Captain, what you did today saved 8 American lives. The SEAL team you supported has already filed their after-action report, and their gratitude for your actions is extensive. General Morrison wanted me to convey that while your methods were irregular, your results were exemplary." The crowd's applause grew louder, and Akira felt tears beginning to form despite her efforts at military composure. She had prepared herself for court-martial proceedings, not commendation. "There will still be paperwork," Hayes continued with a slight smile. "Lots of paperwork, but it won't be the kind that ends careers. The kind of pilot who can thread 30 rounds between friendlies and enemies with margins measured in meters is too valuable to lose over procedural violations." Someone in the crowd called out "Blade," and the chant was quickly taken up by others until her call sign echoed across the flight line like a battle cry. These men and women understood that they had witnessed something special, a pilot willing to risk everything to bring Americans home alive. Later that evening, in the quiet of her quarters, Captain Akira Nakamura sat on her narrow bunk and penned a letter to her grandmother in California. The old woman had survived the internment camps of World War II and raised a son who became an Air Force mechanic, who in turn raised a daughter determined to prove that honor knew no gender boundaries. "Dear grandmother," she wrote in her careful script, "today I remembered everything you taught me about precision, honor, and the importance of doing what is right even when it is difficult. 8 American families will not receive visits from casualty notification officers because I chose to act rather than wait for permission. I hope this would make you proud." She sealed the letter knowing it would never fully convey the weight of what had transpired in that Afghan valley, or how the lessons learned in a small California dojo had translated into life-or-death precision at 30,000 feet. Some things could only be understood by those who had faced similar choices and found the courage to act according to their conscience rather than their career interests. The base had grown quiet around her, but through her window she could see the flight line where her A-10 sat parked among the other aircraft. Tomorrow there would be another mission, other Americans who might need the precision and dedication she had spent years perfecting. Tonight, though, she allowed herself the luxury of knowing that 8 families would not be grieving because one pilot had chosen honor over orders. 3 weeks later, the story had taken on a life of its own throughout the military community in Afghanistan. Every telling seemed to add new details, some accurate and others enhanced by the natural tendency of military folklore to grow in the telling. But the core elements remained constant. A SEAL team trapped in a valley, official channels saying no help was available, and one pilot who decided that official channels could go to hell when American lives were on the line. Captain Nakamura found herself something of a celebrity wherever she went on base. though she handled the attention with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else in her life. When asked about her decision to violate orders, she would simply say that she had done what any pilot would have done in the same situation, a statement that was both modest and completely untrue, since most pilots would have followed orders and waited for proper authorization. The real change came in how her fellow aviators treated her. The gentle mockery that had once accompanied references to her call sign, Blade, had transformed into genuine respect. When she entered the squadron ready room, conversations would pause momentarily as hardened combat pilots acknowledged the presence of someone who had proven herself in the most definitive way possible. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been present at the original briefing, cornered her one afternoon near the flight line. "Ma'am, I've been in this business for 18 years and I've seen a lot of good pilots and a few great ones. What you did out there, that wasn't just good flying. That was something else entirely." Akira appreciated the sentiment, but she remained uncomfortable with the elevated status her actions had earned her. "Sergeant, I just did my job. Any pilot in the squadron would have made the same choice." Rodriguez shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not true and you know it. Half the pilots in this squadron wouldn't have had the balls to disobey direct orders, and the other half wouldn't have had the skill to pull off what you did once they got there. You didn't just save those SEALs, you showed all of us what it means to be a military aviator." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a Humvee carrying personnel from the Special Operations Compound. As it stopped nearby, 8 men in civilian clothes climbed out, their faces tanned and their eyes holding the particular alertness that marked them as members of America's most elite military units. The SEAL team leader, a compact man with graying temples and scars that spoke of many deployments, approached with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to moving through dangerous situations. "Captain Nakamura, I'm Chief Petty Officer Williams, Viper 6. My team and I would like to have a word with you if you have a moment." Akira felt her pulse quicken slightly, though she couldn't say whether from nervousness or pride. These men represented the absolute pinnacle of military professionalism, and their opinion carried weight that transcended normal rank structures. "Of course, Chief, what can I do for you?" Williams gestured toward his men, who had formed a loose semicircle around them. "Ma'am, we wanted to thank you properly for what you did for us out there. We also wanted to give you something." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small metal object that caught the afternoon sunlight. As he handed it to her, Akira realized she was looking at a SEAL Team Trident, the warfare insignia worn by naval special warfare operators. But this one was different, smaller, clearly not an official uniform item. "Ma'am, this is a miniature trident that we had made in the base metal shop. It's not official, and you can't wear it on your uniform, but we wanted you to have something that represents our appreciation for what you did. In our community, we have a saying, 'The only easy day was yesterday.' You made our hardest day survivable, and that's something we won't forget." Akira accepted the small metal insignia with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts at composure. The trident was warm from William's pocket, and she could see the careful craftsmanship that had gone into its creation. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this token of appreciation. "Chief, I don't know what to say. This means more to me than you can know." Williams nodded solemnly. "Ma'am, you gave us our lives back when everyone else said help wasn't coming. That kind of debt doesn't get repaid with words. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you've got 8 brothers who will move heaven and earth to make it happen." As the SEAL team departed, Akira stood holding the miniature trident and feeling the weight of recognition from men whose respect was earned only through demonstrated courage under fire. The small insignia represented something more valuable than any official commendation, the acknowledgement of warriors who had tested her character and found it worthy. That evening, she carefully placed the trident in her personal kit, alongside the few other mementos she carried from deployment to deployment. Unlike official awards that marked career milestones, this small piece of metal represented something more fundamental: the moment when she had been fully accepted into the brotherhood of those who placed mission accomplishment and troop welfare above personal considerations. 6 months after the Valley incident, Captain Nakamura received orders for reassignment to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, where she would serve as an instructor pilot in the A-10 Weapons School. The posting was considered a plum assignment, typically reserved for the Air Force's most capable and respected aviators. Her reputation had clearly preceded her to the assignment officers responsible for such decisions. The day before her departure from Afghanistan, she made one final visit to the memorial wall in the base chapel, a simple wooden board where the names of fallen servicemen were inscribed in black ink. 8 names that might have been added to that wall were instead safely home with their families, serving as a living testament to what could happen when one person chose to act according to conscience rather than convenience. As she stood before the memorial in the quiet sanctuary, Akira reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. Her grandmother's lessons about honor and precision had found their ultimate expression in a cockpit 30,000 feet above an Afghan valley, where split-second decisions carried the weight of human lives. The chapel door opened behind her, and she turned to see Colonel Hayes entering with a manila folder in his hand. His expression was more serious than usual, which immediately put her on alert for whatever news he carried. "Captain, I have your final fitness report here. I thought you might want to see it before it goes into your permanent record." He handed her the folder, and she opened it with the mixture of curiosity and apprehension that all military personnel felt when confronted with official evaluations of their performance. The rating was the highest possible, but it was Hayes' written comments that caught her attention. Captain Nakamura represents the finest traditions of military aviation. Her technical skills are exceptional, but more importantly, she possesses the moral courage to place mission accomplishment and troop welfare above personal considerations. She is exactly the kind of officer the Air Force needs in leadership positions. "Sir, this is generous." Hayes shook his head. "Captain, it's accurate. What you did here will be talked about in ready rooms and flight schools for years to come. But more than that, you've set a standard for what it means to be a military aviator. That's worth more than any medal or commendation." As she prepared to board the transport aircraft that would carry her back to the United States, Akira took one last look at the Afghan landscape that had tested her in ways she had never anticipated. The mountains stretched endlessly toward the horizon, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow serving as witnesses to moments when individuals chose courage over comfort. Her fellow passengers on the rotator flight included soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines returning home from their own deployments, each carrying their own memories of service in a distant land. But she also carried something else: the knowledge that her choices in a moment of crisis had prevented 8 families from experiencing the ultimate military sacrifice. The aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying her away from Afghanistan but not from the lessons she had learned there. Honor was not something that could be taught in classrooms or measured in evaluations. It was revealed in moments when personal cost was weighed against moral obligation, and the correct choice was made regardless of consequences. At Nellis Air Force Base, Captain Nakamura's reputation preceded her like an advance scout, ensuring that her arrival was noted by everyone from the wing commander to the newest student pilots. The weapons school was where the Air Force sent its most promising aviators to learn the advanced tactics and techniques that would be passed on to future generations of combat pilots. Her assignment as an instructor pilot represented recognition that her knowledge and experience were too valuable to be confined to a single cockpit. She would now be responsible for shaping the next generation of A-10 pilots, teaching them not just the technical aspects of close air support, but the judgment and moral courage required to make life-or-death decisions under pressure. The first class of students she addressed included both experienced pilots and relatively new aviators, all of whom had heard various versions of the story about the captain who had disobeyed orders to save a SEAL team. Their faces showed the mixture of curiosity and respect that she had grown accustomed to seeing whenever her reputation preceded her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, standing before a classroom filled with some of the Air Force's most promising pilots, "you're here to learn advanced tactics for the A-10 Thunderbolt II. But tactics are just tools. The real lesson you need to learn is when and how to use those tools in service of something larger than yourself." She gestured toward a map of Afghanistan on the classroom wall. "6 months ago, I made a decision that could have ended my career. I chose to violate direct orders because American lives were at stake and official channels were failing them. I'm not here to advocate for disobedience. I'm here to teach you that being a military aviator means being prepared to make hard choices when the situation demands it." A young lieutenant in the front row raised his hand. "Ma'am, how do you know when breaking the rules is the right thing to do?" Akira considered the question carefully before responding. "Lieutenant, that's the kind of judgment that can't be taught from a textbook. It comes from understanding your mission, knowing your capabilities, and having the moral courage to act when inaction means good people die. The day you stop questioning whether you're doing the right thing is the day you stop being an effective military officer." The classroom fell silent as the students absorbed the implications of what she was telling them. These men and women would soon find themselves in cockpits over hostile territory, responsible for making split-second decisions that could save or cost American lives. The technical skills were important, but the character required to use those skills appropriately was what separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. Over the following months, Captain Nakamura's influence on the weapons school became evident in ways that extended far beyond her specific curriculum. Students began approaching tactical problems with a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between rules and results, recognizing that military effectiveness sometimes required the wisdom to know when conventional approaches were insufficient. Her classroom discussions,